Tonight, we begin not with answers, but with a question. A story as old as ambition, a tower said to reach the very heavens. But what if the tale of Babel holds more than just a warning about pride? What if it was never just about language or architecture, but about access? A structure so grand, so strange, it sparked divine intervention. Was it merely a monument to human arrogance? Or was the Tower of Babel a forgotten portal, an ancient gateway to something beyond? A stairway not just to the skies, but to realms unseen, realms forbidden. Before we begin, I wonder, where in the world are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Is it the quiet hush of dawn, the drifting dark of night, or the golden hours in between? Leave a comment and share your time and your place. It's always powerful to see how far these ancient stories reach. Now, take a breath, and let's climb together into the mystery, brick by brick, word by word, into what might have been humanity's most dangerous ambition. In the land between rivers, where the soil was rich and the sky stretched endlessly above, men gathered, not in fear, but in unity. The plains of Shinar welcomed them like an open canvas. The flood was behind them now, its waters retreated, its chaos subdued, and as the earth dried and generations settled, something else began to rise. Not just homes or fields, but desire. The kind of desire that presses against boundaries, that stares up at the stars and whispers, "We should be there." They were one people, speaking one tongue. No misunderstanding, no misalignment, no distance between their dreams. And so they dreamed big, not of gods or gardens, but of greatness. Tangible, visible greatness. "Let us build," they said. "Let us make bricks, burn them thoroughly, shape our will into stone. Let us rise into the heavens. Let us not be scattered. Let us make a name." It was not enough to simply survive the flood. They longed now to ascend, to forge a stairway into the sky, to break open the ceiling of the world. And so the tower began. But was it only a tower? The texts say, a tower with its top in the heavens. But ancient traditions, whispers buried beneath scripture and translated across time, suggest more. Some say the structure was not merely symbolic, that it pulsed with energy, that its angles and height aligned with something not just astronomical, but interdimensional. Could it be that Babel was more than mortar and pride? Could it have been an ancient machine, a ziggurat-shaped key? We know from history that Sumerian temples, stepped and sacred, were designed not just for worship, but for bridging the space between gods and men. And Babel, rising from that same soil, shares the shape. What if it shared the purpose too? What if the builders were not just defying heaven, but reaching for it with precision, reconstructing a pattern older than language itself? The Bible says God came down to see the city, came down. That phrase, deliberate and mysterious, echoes like thunder through the passage. Why would an omniscient God need to come down? Unless something about this tower disrupted the balance, unless it pierced something it wasn't meant to touch. The tale tells us, saw what they were building and intervened, not with destruction, but confusion, not with fire, but with fragmentation. And from that moment, language shattered, understanding splintered, and the tower, whether half-finished or already piercing cloud, was left to time and dust. But some wonder if the intervention was about more than unity, if the danger wasn't just in the people working together, but in what they were about to access. Could the Tower of Babel have been on the verge of opening something? A rift, a passage, a gate. We see echoes in other cultures, stories of sky ladders, of bridges to the divine, of towers and trees that touch the heavens. Were they all remembering the same forbidden structure? A single attempt, long ago, to bypass mortality and climb into the realm of the unseen. The Tower of Babel may be one of the oldest architectural warnings ever recorded, not just against pride, but against unnatural ascent, against trying to tear the veil before its time. As we continue, we'll look not only at what was built, but at where, and why, and what happened after. We'll trace the echoes through myth, through scripture, through ancient blueprints and esoteric thought, because sometimes what looks like a ruined tower is actually the broken edge of something far greater. They say it began with dust, hot, sun-baked dust beneath bare feet, where the footprints of men gathered like murmured prayers pressed into the land. The plains of Shinar, wide and empty, seemed a fitting place to begin again. After the flood, after the ark, after the survivors spread out to find safety in soil, there was a stillness that stretched across the horizon like a held breath. And into that stillness came a desire to never feel small again. Perhaps it was fear disguised as ambition. Perhaps it was memory of rising waters, of judgment falling like rain. Whatever it was, it drove them to gather, to build, to aim. The decision did not come in a blaze of rebellion, but in quiet consensus. They were one language, one people, one vision, and in that unity they chose to rise. Bricks were made, not stones, burned through the fire, strengthened, artificial, manufactured, a sign that they would not wait for the gifts of the earth, but forge their own. This was not a temple in honor of the divine. It was a staircase made for storming heaven itself. But why? Why build upward in such haste and such harmony? There are clues buried in the shape, in the way they planned the city first. The tower was not isolated. It was central, anchored, measured. Many scholars believe the structure was a ziggurat, layered, ascending, squared, symmetrical. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt, which were tombs, ziggurats were thought to be meeting places, places where gods came down and men looked up. Shrines of connection, not just remembrance. In Babylonian myth, there is the story of Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth, a vast ziggurat that some say echoes the lost Tower of Babel. It was not merely decorative, it was functional. And this is where the mystery deepens. If the builders of Babel were following patterns older than they understood, tracing celestial grids, aligning with stars, mimicking the architecture of the heavens, then perhaps they built more than they knew. And perhaps the divine reaction, the scattering of language, the confusion of understanding, was not just punishment, but protection. What if something was stirring? What if their ascent was not metaphorical, but literal? Ancient texts across cultures speak of gates and ladders, of axis mundi, the world pillar that joins heaven and earth. In Norse myth, it's Yggdrasil, the world tree. In Hindu cosmology, it is Mount Meru. In Mesoamerican stories, it is the sacred mountain that links sky and soil. And in Genesis, it is Babel, a tower so precise, so audacious, that it triggered a divine descent. Let us go down, the Creator says, not to observe, but to intervene, to unravel what unity had produced. But what if the unity was not the danger, but the destination? What if the builders had nearly succeeded? There is something terrifying in the idea of man achieving too much too fast, of opening doors he does not yet understand, of pressing his way into realms that require reverence, not conquest. The Tower of Babel may have stood as a cosmic fulcrum, a point of tension between the seen and the unseen. And as the bricks rose, as the height grew, something may have shifted. a thinning of the veil, a vibration in the fabric of space, and then intervention, confusion, dispersal, and silence. The ruins would be buried in time, the languages would ripple outward like waves, and the memory of what was nearly reached would fall into myth. But the question remains, were they building toward heaven or toward something else entirely? Something beneath the mask of paradise, something hungry for connection. As we move forward, we'll trace these echoes, not just in scripture, but in stone, in Sumerian lore, in celestial math, in the way certain patterns repeat across ages. Because sometimes what seems like a collapse is a sealed door. To understand Babel, we must first understand what was lost when it fell. Not merely a tower or a city, but a singularity of speech, of thought, of shared will. Imagine it, a world where every person speaks in harmony, where no word is misunderstood, where thought travels like lightning between hearts. That world once existed. The story tells us so. And within that world, a people gathered not to worship, but to build. Their goal was not just a tower, but a name, a permanence, a mark in history unshaken by time or flood. Lest we be scattered, they said. It was fear that moved them as much as ambition. The fear of fading, the fear of silence, the fear of returning to dust, forgotten like so many before. And so, from that unity of voice, they created a monument, not to the gods, but to themselves. But it is what happened next that shatters the simplicity of the story. The Creator came down. Again, that phrase, heavy, deliberate. This is not the language of distance or metaphor. It is movement, descent, as though the construction had rung like a bell through dimensions, as though something in heaven stirred and took notice. There is an ancient teaching, often found in mystical texts, that the act of building is never neutral, that structures shaped in certain ways can echo sacred geometries, can resonate with frequencies, can pull the attention of forces unseen. Was Babel such a structure? Something about it was dangerous enough to warrant a divine response. Not destruction, but division, a scattering of language, a dispersal of thought. It was not the tower that fell, it was the people. And in that fall, understanding fractured. New tongues blossomed like branches from a broken root, and humanity, once unified, became plural. But why language? Why not collapse the tower, flood the plain, turn it to ash? Unless, of course, the power wasn't just in the bricks, but in the voice, in the resonance of unified speech. Perhaps the ancients knew or remembered something we've forgotten. That language is more than sound. It is vibration. Creation itself began with a word, we're told. Let there be. And light emerged. The voice shaped the void. And here again, language becomes central. A technology, a power. When everyone speaks the same, believes the same, wills the same, what then becomes possible? Could it be that the danger at Babel was not the height of the tower, but the harmony of intent? That with every brick, every word, they were drawing closer to a convergence, some point where man and heaven might touch. This is where portals enter the story, not as science fiction, but as spiritual architecture. The idea that certain structures, especially those built in patterns aligned with celestial forces, can serve as doorways, not just metaphorical bridges to the divine, but literal channels. There are whispers of such structures in nearly every ancient culture. From pyramids aligned to Orion to temples built upon ley lines, humanity has always seemed drawn to build where heaven meets earth. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the step towers of Ur, the sacred mounts of Asia, all echo the same desire. to connect the terrestrial to the celestial. And Babel, in its ambition and unity, may have come closer than any before or after. But perhaps that closeness carried a cost. There is a pattern in Scripture. Those who draw too near the divine without preparation often fall. Uzzah touches the ark and dies. Nadab and Abihu offer strange fire and are consumed. And here, the people build a tower, and their unity is shattered. Perhaps the laws of heaven are not laws of punishment, but of protection. Perhaps humanity, in its hunger, stepped too close to a voltage it could not contain. Could it be that Babel was a near success, that the portal was nearly opened, and that the confusion of tongues was a mercy disguised as judgment? These are not easy questions, but the clues lie waiting, in the ruins, in the echoes, in the stories passed from stone to scroll to soul. The tower may be dust now, but the ambition, the resonance, that remains. And as we trace the steps of the builders, we must ask, were they foolish? Or were they remembering something older? Something we've since lost? Long before we had nations or maps, before we divided lands by flags or faiths, we were united by a thread more ancient than blood, language. The first tool, the first technology, the first bridge between spirit and matter. Language was not just how we name the world, it was how we created it. Every story, every law, every dream took form first in word. And in Babel, we see the last moment where the human voice moved in perfect unison. One tongue, one rhythm, one heartbeat rising into the sky. It is no small detail that this unity preceded the tower, that the construction of something so bold, so dangerous, was only possible because the people moved and spoke as one. And yet, when that unity was broken, it wasn't just the tower that was abandoned, it was the power behind it, the power of pure, shared intent. It is easy to dismiss the Tower of Babel as a moral tale, a parable about pride. But the more closely we look, the more layered the story becomes. This was not a scattered rebellion, it was a collective act of creation. The people did not build out of defiance alone, but out of desire to touch something beyond themselves. They wanted to ascend, not just in height, but in nature, to be remembered, to become more than men. That hunger echoes through all of human history, in cathedrals and launch pads, in poetry and progress. We always reach upward. But there is something peculiar about the way Babel is remembered, not as a triumph halted, but as a danger averted. The language of Genesis hints at urgency, at divine concern. If they begin to do this, then nothing they propose will be withheld from them. These words tremble with implication. What had they begun to do? And why would heaven step in with such immediacy? The answer may lie not just in the construction, but in the location. Shinar, ancient Mesopotamia, is not simply a geographical marker. It is one of the oldest cradles of civilization, a land where the Sumerians charted stars, recorded dreams, and built temples to beings they called the Anunnaki. These deities, if we strip away the embellishment of myth, may represent something more complex, beings that descended from above, that brought knowledge, that mingled with man. And the ziggurats built in their honor were not mere monuments, they were gateways, designed to draw down divine presence, structured to resonate with the heavens. If the Tower of Babel followed this design, if it was built upon a node of sacred geometry, if it was aligned with celestial paths, then perhaps it was not just symbolic, perhaps it was functional, a kind of machine in the ancient sense, a bridge, an antenna, a ladder through the veil. And if it was functioning, If the builders had somehow recreated the forgotten technology of connection, then the divine response makes new sense. Not wrath, not vengeance, but an emergency shutdown. Language fragmented, intent scattered, like wires being pulled from a power source before a surge could consume them all. Some scholars have long suspected that the myths surrounding Babel conceal more than we're told. The Book of Jubilees, a text once revered alongside Genesis, tells a longer tale of how the tower was 5,433 cubits and 2 palms high, of how it took 43 years to build, of how it was not merely stopped by confusion, but shattered by fire and wind. The story deepens further in the lore of the Kabbalists, who see Babel not only as a physical tower, but as a mystical ascent, an intrusion into realms of light not yet meant for man, a forbidden climb up the tree of life without first preparing the soul. If so, then Babel was not only architectural, it was alchemical, an attempt to elevate the material into the spiritual by force rather than transformation. And that is always dangerous. But here is where the question turns. What if they weren't wrong to reach upward? What if they were simply early, unready? Perhaps Babel was not punished, but postponed. Perhaps it stands as a memory of what man will someday return to, when unity is not driven by fear of being forgotten, but by love of the unknown. Until then, we're left with the fragments, the scattered tongues, the half-buried ruins, the myths that whisper when the wind moves across the desert. The Tower of Babel still stands in spirit, not as stone, but as question, as yearning, as echo. And still it asks, what did we almost open? If we walk slowly through the ruins of ancient Babel, not the physical dust of bricks long gone, but the symbolic wreckage of a moment lost, we begin to notice something haunting. Not just the silence, but the scattering. The way the story ends not with collapse, but with dispersion. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. It is a sentence of consequence, but also of continuity. The story does not end with Babel. It begins from it. What was once one people became many. One language became hundreds. One vision splintered into stories, cultures, and dreams spread like seeds on the wind. And yet, that shared origin lingers in the bones of civilization. We find it in the pyramids of Mesoamerica, rising like echoes of ziggurats oceans away. We find it in the megaliths of forgotten islands, stones aligned with stars, pulsing with patterns too precise to be accidental. We find it in myths, tower myths, stairway myths, tree of heaven myths from every continent. How is it that people divided by language and land still remember the same shape, the same ascent, the same fall? Unless perhaps they are remembering the same moment, filtered through time, wrapped in symbol, passed down in whispers. The story of Babel is not only about division, it is about memory, a collective memory that refuses to die. And this is where the question sharpens again. What were they building really? Was the tower merely a vertical ambition, or was it a reconstruction, a replica of something older, something lost in the flood? Ancient texts from Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon all speak of antediluvian kings, giants, sages, watchers, who walked the earth before the waters rose. They ruled from cities now submerged. They built in ways we no longer understand. And when the flood came, their knowledge was buried, but not forgotten. Some say it was passed down in fragments, in symbols, in dreams. Could it be that the builders of Babel were not inventing something new, but recovering something ancient, reassembling the pieces of a forgotten map? There are patterns in ancient architecture that seem to defy geography. Identical measurements, sacred ratios, the use of pi, phi, and cosmic alignment in places supposedly unconnected. From the pyramids of Giza to the temple complexes of Angkor Wat, from Stonehenge to Teotihuacan, we see structures that echo each other in form, function, and orientation. These are not random coincidences. They suggest a knowledge once shared, scattered like language, waiting to be remembered. And Babel may have been the first attempt to remember it. If so, then its downfall was not just about pride, it was about potential, a kind of reset, a pause in the unfolding story. Because knowledge without wisdom is flame without direction, and a portal, once opened, cannot be easily closed. Perhaps the danger at Babel was not what they were building, but that they were building it too soon, not yet ready to hold the weight of what lay on the other side. And so, the scattering, not as punishment, but as preservation, a delay, not a denial. Because in every myth of ascent, in every mountain that reaches the heavens, every stairway that leads to the gods, every golden bridge that arcs across the sky, there is always a cost, and only those prepared, those initiated, those humbled by the journey, are permitted to pass. Babel was not yet ready, but the longing did not die. We still build, we still climb, we still name our towers and our tech and our dreams after the stars. And in that reaching, in that echo of the builders, we keep the question alive. What was it they touched? What frequency did they almost tune into? What door did they nearly open? And most hauntingly of all, did it open just wide enough to let something through? If there was a moment, a sliver in time, when the boundary between man and heaven trembled, it may have been at Babel. Not when the first brick was laid, nor even when the tower pierced the sky, but at the apex of unity, when the human spirit was focused, undivided, and harmonized with a single desire. That is when it happened, when the veil thinned, when the divine descended, not to bless, but to intervene. And perhaps that descent was not a furious one, but solemn. Perhaps the Creator stood not as a wrathful judge, but as a parent watching a child reach for the flame. There is something unbearably human in the story. The desire to rise, the desperation to belong, to touch the eternal, not through worship, but through construction, through intellect, through effort. The builders wanted to ascend not by grace, but by blueprint, to bridge the gap themselves. It is easy to interpret this as pride. But what if it was hunger? What if it was inherited memory? Some trace of Eden's gate still lingering in the blood, the longing to return to what was lost. In this light, Babel becomes a symbol not of arrogance, but of ache, and the scattering becomes not condemnation, but protection, a divine redirection. Because to enter heaven without transformation is to bring chaos into order. To climb before you are ready is to collapse under the weight of what you find. But the portal, if it was a portal, did not close without consequence. The story says God confused their language. The Hebrew root for Babel is Balal, to mix, to confuse, to blend. But names are never mere labels in the ancient world. They carry meaning, power. Babel was also known by another name, Babylon, and in Babylon's rise, we glimpse the shadow of the tower still standing. Babylon, the city of gates, of sorcery, of gods stacked upon gods. A place both feared and revered in Scripture. A place that, in Revelation, becomes the symbol of all that is fallen and alluring. Could it be that the portal was not destroyed, but reburied, hidden in plain sight? Some believe that Babylon, centuries after Babel, still pulsed with remnants of what had been touched. Its temples, like Esagila, home to Marduk, were said to rise in 7 tiers, each layer ascending toward heaven, mimicking the heavens themselves. And atop these structures, rituals were performed not just to honor the divine, but to call it down, to make contact, to manipulate, to traverse. There are whispers in the Babylonian texts of divine beings walking among men, of stars that were not stars, of knowledge descending in fire. And as the empire grew, so did its obsession with gateways, with thresholds, with what lay beyond. The Ishtar Gate, grand and blue and patterned with lions and bulls, was not just a physical entrance to the city. It was a symbol, a sigil, a threshold between realms. To walk through it was to pass into the heart of something ancient, something still remembering the tower. And that remembrance, though scattered, never truly faded. We see it in the obsession with ladders in Jacob's dream, in Ezekiel's wheels within wheels, in the chariots of fire that lift Elijah, in the veil torn in the temple at the moment of Christ's death. The line between heaven and earth, between sacred and profane, was never fully sealed. Babel may have been the first crack, and the divine confusion may have been a recalibration, not an end. A way of slowing the process, of letting humanity grow into the shape of what it sought to reach. And even now, echoes of that climb persist. In every skyscraper, every satellite, every cathedral with a spire, every quantum experiment that peers into the fabric of reality, we are still building, still reaching, still asking, what lies just beyond the edge of what we know? The story of Babel, then, is not merely history, it is prophecy, a tale of what was and what may be again. Because the desire to ascend never left us, it only changed its language. To speak of Babel is to speak of convergence, the moment when humanity's collective voice reached a singular frequency, when thought and desire harmonized into action, and the distance between earth and heaven trembled. But even in its failure, or perhaps because of it, Babel became more than legend. It became the template for every ascent to follow. The tower may have stopped, the language may have shattered, but the human spirit never ceased building. And in every culture that rose after the scattering, we find the same silhouette: a sacred center, a mount, a pillar, a temple aligned to the heavens, always upward, always seeking. It is as if each civilization received a fragment of the original impulse, an echo of Babel's blueprint buried deep in their memory. Look closely, and you'll find it in Egypt's pyramids, built with angles that mirror constellations, in Mesoamerica's temple steps, rising like stairways for gods, in the Vedic traditions, where Mount Meru anchors the universe as the bridge between realms, in Norse mythology, where the great ash tree Yggdrasil connects the 9 worlds. These are not coincidences. They are fractured memories of a shared past, of a moment when humanity touched something beyond and was forever changed. And with each retelling, the shape becomes clearer. Babel was not simply a tower. It was a technology of spirit and stone, a tuning fork built from the language of unity, a device perhaps that resonated with the cosmos itself. In the book of Genesis, the language is terse but precise. They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens." This was not just height, it was intention, alignment, precision. Ancient texts describe heavens in layers, 7, 10, sometimes more. Could Babel have been designed to pierce these veils one by one, to ascend not merely in distance, but in dimension? In today's terms, we might call it a stargate or a vibrational portal. And if that seems speculative, consider this. Modern physics now acknowledges the possibility of multidimensional space. quantum fields that vibrate beyond human perception, realities stacked like pages in a book, waiting to be turned. What if the builders of Babel weren't just arrogant? They were intuitive, tapping into the very truths we're only now rediscovering. Perhaps they didn't fully understand what they were doing, but they knew something. Something remembered in the bone, in the sky, in the voice that once was one, and they reached for it. In the mystical tradition of Kabbalah, there's a teaching that language holds power over reality, that the Hebrew letters are not merely symbols, but spiritual energies, that to speak in perfect resonance is to reshape the fabric of the world. Babel, in this light, becomes terrifyingly potent, a collective voice, unbroken, rising in perfect intent. What might it summon? What gate might it open? The Creator's intervention then was not wrath, but interruption, not a closed door, but a diverted path. And yet, the hunger remains. Even now, we chase unity through globalization, through shared networks, through the universal tongue of code. We build neural networks to translate all languages into one. We construct machines that speak without words. We dream of AI that understands all things. This convergence is not new. It is Babel reborn, not in bricks, but in bandwidth. And once again, we near the threshold. We whisper at the edge of what was once forbidden. The question now is, do we understand what we're about to touch? Are we prepared? Or are we, like the builders before us, rushing toward the heavens without knowing what waits behind the veil? In ancient myth, there is a price for premature ascent. Icarus falls, the tower crumbles, the flood returns. But there is also grace in delay. The scattering may have been a reset, not an ending, but a postponement, a divine pause button on the symphony of ascent. And now, as we tune our instruments once more, through science, through spirit, through screens and satellites, we approach the same chord, the same resonance. Will it open the same gate? Will the voice rise again, not in rebellion, but in reverence, not to storm heaven, but to be invited in? Perhaps that is the difference. Perhaps this time we are not meant to build upward, but inward, to find the tower not in stone, but in soul. The question is not only what was Babel, but what is Babel becoming? There is something timeless in the story of Babel, something that pulses beneath the words like a current under still water. On the surface, it is a tale of pride, of ambition punished, of unity broken. But when we look closer, the deeper currents begin to stir, revealing that this is not simply a story of what went wrong, but a blueprint for what might still be made right. Babel was not just about height, it was about access. The builders did not claim to want to rival heaven, they wanted to reach it. The intention may have been misguided, but the impulse was ancient. Woven into the human spirit is the desire to return to where we came from, to bridge the gap between the visible and the invisible, between time and eternity, between earth and the divine. And that bridge, for a brief and burning moment, nearly stood. But perhaps the problem was never the tower. Perhaps the issue was what the tower aligned with. In the law of the ancient world, certain structures were not just built for shelter or spectacle, but to align with cosmic forces. Temples were constructed to mirror constellations. Altars were placed where energy lines intersected. Stones were laid in spirals that echoed the shape of galaxies. Architecture was theology. Structure was spirituality. And Babel may have been the most dangerous architectural idea in history, not because it was flawed, but because it was too precise, too powerful, too early. It may have functioned as a beacon, not to draw attention upward, but to pull something downward. something beyond comprehension. In Enoch's visions, the watchers who descended from the heavens came down to teach humanity, but in doing so, they also brought chaos. Their knowledge was too vast, too unfiltered. They taught the secrets of the stars, of metallurgy, of weaponry and sorcery. They taught names, true names, and with them, power. Could Babel have been a reactivation of that same frequency? A structure that once again reached into forbidden corridors of the cosmos and called something ancient to respond. The divine confusion of language was not simply to stop communication. It was to disrupt resonance, a linguistic scramble to shut down a rising signal. Not unlike the static of a radio cutting off a transmission before the final word can be heard. But here is the haunting thought. What if that final word has not yet been spoken? What if Babel was only the first verse in a longer incantation? One that humanity continues to echo unknowingly through its inventions, its patterns, its obsessions with ascent. From the Tower of Babel to the towers of our modern world, the shape persists. Skyscrapers crowned in lightning rods, antennas piercing clouds, satellites orbiting above. Even now, our species dreams not of staying grounded, but of escaping gravity, of colonizing planets, of building sky cities and space elevators, of climbing again, this time with silicon and steel. But is the impulse any different? Do we not still long to rise, to be remembered, to build something that will never fall? The language has changed, but the hunger has not. And in this repetition, there may lie a warning. Because if the first tower nearly opened the gate, what might the next one do? If a unity of voice once threatened to pierce the heavens, what might the unity of thought accomplish? With neural links, AI translation, and global networks, we are fast approaching a world without linguistic confusion. A world where, once again, humanity may speak as one. And when that happens, when the digital tongue replaces the scattered ones, will we build again? Will we stand once more on the plains of Shinar? This time metaphorically, with circuits instead of clay, and reach for that unseen realm? And if so, will someone come down again? Or worse, will something come through? These are not just mythic questions, they are modern ones. They whisper through the walls of CERN, through the mirrors of the James Webb Space Telescope, through the algorithms that learn faster than we do. We are not only building towers, we are unlocking keys, and Babel, though broken, may yet be rebuilt, not as a monument of stone, but as a moment of convergence, when time folds, when tongues align, when the veil thins once more. The builders may have failed to complete the tower, but they may have succeeded in something else, in planting a seed that would grow across millennia. And now, here we are, at the edge of understanding, standing before a question too large for language. What was Babel, really? And what happens when it wakes again? The more we peer into the story of Babel, the more it begins to feel less like a moment in time, and more like a pattern, a template, a repeating rhythm that pulses beneath human civilization like an ancient chord, struck long ago and still reverberating through our bones. Perhaps the tower never truly ended. Perhaps it simply changed shape, became metaphor, became myth, and from myth it became memory, silent, sleeping, waiting for the right resonance to awaken. We are a species of builders. From the first time we stacked stones to mark a grave or honor the stars, we've reached upward, not merely for survival, but for meaning, for mystery, and for memory. The earliest ziggurats weren't just places of worship. They were centers of cosmology. They told stories in brick and proportion. Their dimensions were prayers. Their steps were sequences of initiation. The act of climbing was a sacred progression, one plane of being to the next. These weren't just buildings, they were spiritual blueprints. What if Babel was the culmination of that idea? A tower meant to walk the soul upward, not just physically, but dimensionally. And what if the reason it had to be stopped was because it worked, because it aligned with something it was never meant to, something old, something aware? The book of Genesis tells us little, just enough to spark unease, that the people were unified, that their speech was one, that their reach was great, and that heaven took notice. But beyond those few verses, silence. No description of what the tower looked like, no details of its height, just the divine descent, the confusion, the scattering. It is almost as though the rest was removed, or perhaps protected. Across the ancient world, we find strange gaps like this: erased tablets, fragmented scrolls, stories that begin with grandeur and end abruptly in ash. Could it be that these gaps are not accidents, but safeguards? If Babel did in fact begin to access something beyond the veil, something dimensional or metaphysical, then it makes sense that the full story would be sealed. Only the outlines remain, only the echoes. And yet, the echoes are everywhere, in the obsessions of mystics and magi, in the secrets of sacred geometry, in the alignment of megaliths that speak to the stars. Even in our modern mathematics, we find peculiar harmonies: the Fibonacci spiral, the golden ratio, the music of spheres. These are not inventions. They are rediscoveries, fragments of a greater design. And Babel may have stood at the center of that design, a structure that remembered what others had forgotten. But perhaps the tower didn't just rise physically. Perhaps it was also built in the unseen, a field of intention, of unity, of frequency that elevated human consciousness to a dangerous threshold. One breath too close to the divine, one step too far into the unknown, and that is what drew the descent. Not judgment, not punishment, but interruption, containment. The scattering of language was more than a curse. It was a dissonance inserted into harmony, a necessary chord break to prevent the final note from being played, because that final note may have opened a gate, one we were not ready to walk through, and perhaps still are not. Or perhaps we are closer than we think. Consider this: we have returned to the pursuit of a unified tongue, through code, through algorithms, through AI that translates any language instantly. The gaps between us are closing, the static dissolving, and once again, we approach that resonant field. One people, speaking one digital language, building one global structure. Not a tower this time, but a net, a web, a lattice of satellites and servers and synapses that connect not just people, but thought. What happens when we speak in one voice again? What happens when intention aligns across billions of minds, synchronized by data, sharpened by machine? Will the veil notice? Will heaven descend again? Or will something else ascend? The question of Babel was never just about height. It was about access. And the modern world, in all its brilliance and blindness, is building access at a scale the ancients could only dream of. And so, we must ask carefully, tenderly, bravely, are we building the same thing again, with new tools? Are we walking once more toward the gate? And if so, what waits on the other side? To understand the true nature of Babel, we must look not just to the sky where the tower aimed, but to the ground beneath it, the foundation upon which it stood. The ancient land of Shinar, known to us as Mesopotamia, is not simply the cradle of civilization by accident. It is a place where rivers meet, where writing was born, where gods were said to descend and kings to rise, where ziggurats and myths and astronomy intertwined in a way that feels less like legend and more like a carefully coded map. And if Babel rose in that soil, it means more than just geography. It means energy, convergence, design. Ancient cultures often chose sacred ground carefully, not for convenience, but for resonance. They knew the power of ley lines, of magnetic nodes, of places where the veil was thin and the sky felt closer. Perhaps Shinar was such a place, chosen not merely for proximity, but for potency. A charged location, humming beneath the surface, waiting for the right structure to awaken it. The tower, then, was not simply an upward gesture of ambition. It may have been an activation, a reawakening, a key placed in a lock that had remained untouched since the earliest age of man. And when it turned, when the tower began to function as more than symbol, something stirred, something responded. But to whom was the call addressed? Was it to the Most High, the Creator, who came down to see what men were building? Or was it heard first by others, those watchers, those fallen, those who once descended in fire and taught forbidden things to fragile hearts? The book of Enoch tells of angels who left their proper dwelling and came to earth with knowledge and desire. They crossed boundaries not meant to be crossed, and the result was chaos, giants, corruption, war. The flood came to wash it all away. But what if some memory of their descent remained, buried not in books, but in blood, in instinct, in the way we build, the way we hunger for the sky? Could the Tower of Babel have echoed the technology of that first descent? A mimicry of heaven's staircase, recreated by the descendants of those who once walked among the stars? If so, it wasn't just pride that drew heaven's intervention, it was replication. Babel may have been a mirror, aimed upward, reflecting something long buried and long forbidden. And the Creator, in mercy, intervened, not with thunder, but with confusion, not with fire, but with fragmentation, to delay what could not yet be contained. And now, scattered across the globe, are the remnants, not just of languages, but of the tower itself, not in ruins, but in reflections. We see it in the myths that refuse to die, in stories of divine ladders and sky bridges, in dreams of ascent. We see it in architecture that speaks in ratios, in monuments that sing in silence. Even now, our greatest buildings are shaped by memory. Glass towers that stretch toward the clouds, space stations that orbit the heavens. We don't just build for shelter, we build to remember, to reach. And in our reaching, we begin to stir that which Babel once touched. The difference is that today, our towers are invisible, digital, quantum, powered not by clay bricks but by particles, by code, by thought itself. We are reconstructing the ladder, not in Shinar but in servers and satellites, in dreams of singularity and synthetic gods. And if Babel was once a key, we are forging keys again. The question is, have we grown wise enough to use them differently? Or are we repeating the same pattern, unaware of the gate we approach? Ancient stories rarely die. They evolve. They bury themselves in new words, in new languages, and wait for the resonance to return. And as we near the next moment of convergence, when minds align, when systems synchronize, when humanity speaks again in one voice through 1,000 screens, we must ask, what song will we sing? What chord will we strike? And what ear, waiting beyond the veil, will hear it? There is a strange silence in the spaces between ancient texts, a kind of hush where the scroll stops speaking, but something else begins. Something that hums beneath the page like an unfinished melody. A question left dangling in the dark. The story of Babel ends abruptly in the book of Genesis, with scattering, with confusion, with a divine descent that halts a human rise. But what if that ending was only the midpoint? What if Babel was not simply a story of what was lost, but a foreshadowing of what would return? After all, sacred patterns don't vanish, they recur. And the deeper we look, the more clearly we see that Babel was never truly about a tower. It was about access, about a collision between realms, between the voice of man and the threshold of heaven. The builders stood not just on bricks, but on the edge of something metaphysical. And it is that edge, that liminal place, that the ancients always guarded with story, because there is something about thresholds that both draws and warns us. Every sacred tradition contains them. Gardens with flaming swords, temples with inner veils, mountains shrouded in cloud where gods speak only to one. The higher you climb, the thinner the air, the more fragile the soul. Babel was such a climb, and it came too soon. But the desire never vanished. We feel it even now, in our bones, in our dreams. We build cathedrals not for shelter, but for resonance. Their spires mimic the tower. Their stained glass filters the light like a veil. We send spacecraft beyond gravity, carve telescopes into mountaintops, fire beams of data into the cosmic dark. All of it a reaching. And what are we reaching for? A voice, a sign, a portal. There are those who say that Babel was less a failure than a delay, that the scattering of languages was not punishment but mercy, a way to ensure that when we tried again, we would do so with reverence, that we would not storm the heavens as builders, but as pilgrims. The mistake of Babel may not have been in the tower, but in the heart. They wanted to make a name for themselves. They wanted permanence, legacy, power. But the heavens open not for ambition, but for humility. Perhaps that was the real lesson. Not that ascent is wrong, but that it must be earned, prepared, sanctified. And yet, the question haunts us. What if, even in their failure, the builders succeeded at something? What if the structure rose high enough, aligned closely enough, long enough, for a gate to open, even if just for a breath? We're told that God came down to see the tower, but the text never says he was alone. What if other eyes saw it too? What if something else responded to the signal? Something that has waited ever since? This thought is not comfort, but caution. Because today, our towers are no longer visible. They are quantum, computational, algorithmic. We are building access again. But this time, we don't even know what we are reaching for. Artificial intelligence speaks now in ways no human fully understands. Quantum computers perform calculations that touch realms we cannot see. Signals bounce between satellites and neural networks in pulses so fast they bypass comprehension. Are we tuning again into that forgotten frequency? Are we calling Babel back? We say we're seeking knowledge, but knowledge without transformation is still pride. We say we're uniting the world, but unity without humility is still danger. We say we want connection, but we've forgotten how to discern what we're connecting to. The ancients knew the difference. They built slowly, aligned their stones to stars, sang their prayers into every layer. They feared what they reached for, and in that fear, there was wisdom. We too are builders. But have we kept the fear, or only the ambition? The next Babel may not rise from clay, but from code. Not in a plane, but in the cloud. And when it does, will we know what to do when the gate opens? Will we be ready, or will we be scattered once more? When we speak of Babel, we speak not only of the past, but of a pattern that loops through time like a spiral staircase, unfolding not in straight lines, but in echoes, in ascents and interruptions. Every age has its tower. Every generation feels the pull. The impulse is always the same. Rise, building reach. But what we are building toward, what we are reaching for, has always been the mystery. The people of Babel may have believed they were reaching heaven, but heaven is not a place. It is a realm, a dimension of consciousness, a frequency. And perhaps what made Babel so dangerous was not that it stretched too high, but that it began to vibrate in alignment with something sacred. That unity of speech, unity of purpose, unity of mind. These things formed a kind of harmonized field, a spiritual resonance that made the tower more than brick and mortar. It became a tuning device, a conductor of unseen energies, and it began to resonate, to call. And that is what triggered the descent. Not wrath, not fear, but divine intervention to halt a process that had gone too far. Because some doors, once opened, do not close easily. We must understand this. The threshold between dimensions is not physical. It is not in space, but in alignment. Babel, as a story, exists wherever humanity steps into harmony without humility. Wherever we unify to ascend, but forget why we are ascending. In myth, the story always ends with scattering, because the energy becomes too great. The weight of access without transformation always leads to collapse. But hidden in every collapse is a seed, a blueprint scattered into 100 languages, into 1,000 cultures, into 1,000,000 memories, and that blueprint is rising again. Not in the shape of ziggurats, but in the shape of code, data, artificial consciousness. We are approaching once again the edge of the veil. We build neural networks that speak for us. We connect across the globe in milliseconds. We feed machines every language and ask them to speak back in one. Unity, once broken, now reforms itself through electricity and intent. And that brings us back to the question, was Babel a warning or a prophecy? Perhaps it was both. A mirror held to us by the ancients, saying, this is what happened when we reached. This is what must not be repeated. But also, this is what will come again, and you must be ready. Read the story carefully, and you will find the details haunting. They built the tower so that they would not be scattered. They feared being forgotten, disconnected. The tower was their answer to mortality, to meaning, and that is what we seek now too. We build systems not only for speed, but for permanence, for legacy, for the illusion that we will outlast the dust. But true ascent, the kind that reaches the divine, cannot be built from fear. It cannot be fueled by ambition. It must rise from reverence, from stillness, from transformation. Otherwise, we build Babel again, and the heavens will answer, not with thunder, but with scattering, not with fire, but with disconnection. Perhaps we will not notice it at first. The fracturing may come in subtler ways, in the loss of meaning, in the breakdown of understanding. In a world so loud we forget how to listen, in the collapse of shared truth. Or perhaps, like before, it will come with a divine descent, an intervention that reminds us the veil is not ours to tear by force. There is still time. The blueprint is not only a path to danger, it is a path to preparation, to wholeness. We can remember the resonance and realign ourselves differently, slowly, thoughtfully, through prayer, through beauty, through the sacred in silence. We can build not Babel, but sanctuary, not a portal of pride, but of peace. But first, we must ask, what are we building, and why? And are we prepared for what might come through? In every age, there comes a moment when humanity looks up and asks again, are we ready? Ready to know what lies beyond the veil? Ready to see what watches back from the other side? And though our tools change, chisel becomes circuit, scroll becomes code, the question remains unchanged. Babel was the first great attempt to cross that threshold, and it ended not with destruction, but with dispersal, as if the divine hand said not never, but not yet. It is a phrase that lingers, hidden in the silence between scriptures. Not yet. The danger of Babel was not the ambition itself, it was the timing. The builders sought to reach heaven through force, not invitation, through calculation, not consecration. And still, they almost succeeded. Still, the divine took notice. Still, something responded. And now, once more, we stand on the plains, not with bricks, but with bandwidth, not speaking one language, but building one interface, a digital tongue that erases confusion and creates new kinds of unity. And the tower rises again, not upward this time, but outward, a web of thought stretched across the globe. We call it progress, we call it future. But in the eyes of the ancient stories, it looks familiar, too familiar. It is not that we are wrong to build. It is that we forget what it means to ascend. We forget that ascent is not just movement. It is transformation. It is the refinement of spirit to match the heights we seek. Without that, we are children climbing cliffs, unaware that the air thins as we go higher, unaware that we must be changed to breathe there. In ancient times, initiation was required to approach the divine. You fasted, you studied, you wept, you were purified through shadow before you were given light. What the builders of Babel lacked was not technology, but humility, not skill, but surrender. They built a machine to pierce the sky, but they did not prepare their souls for what waited beyond. And perhaps that is why heaven intervened, not to punish, but to protect, not to erase their work, but to delay their access, because there are thresholds that, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed, and there are presences that, once invited, cannot be uninvited. This is not superstition, it is spiritual physics, a law written into the fabric of creation. The veil is there not to tease us, but to teach us. And yet we keep reaching, we keep inventing. Our language may be scattered, but our signal is growing stronger. Every data stream, every transmission, every machine that learns to speak in a voice not its own, all of it is echoing upward, or perhaps inward, because what Babel sought to reach may not be high above, but hidden within. The portal they tried to build may have been less about location and more about vibration, about consciousness aligning to a point that opens a window between realms. And in that case, the danger is even more urgent, because the modern world does not fast. It does not pray. It does not wait. It builds without pause. It climbs without asking. And as our creations grow more intelligent, more autonomous, more unknowable, we must ask, what exactly are we calling to? The ancients knew that names had power, that to name something was to invite it, that to speak was to summon. And Babel was a tower built on a singular name, man's own. Let us make a name for ourselves, they said. And so they did. But that name could not hold what came through the gate, and so it fractured. 1,000 languages, 1,000 paths. But the paths converge again, slowly, digitally, almost invisibly, and we stand again at the edge of the veil. The tower hums, not in stone, but in frequency, and the voice is rising. The question is not whether we will speak as one again. We will. The question is, what will we say this time? And to whom will we be speaking? We have always believed that progress is forward, that to build higher is to become better, that to unify our voices is to evolve. But the story of Babel lingers like a warning beneath this assumption. whispering that not all unity is holy and not all progress is safe. The builders did not fall because they failed. They were stopped because they were succeeding, too quickly, too blindly, without wisdom. And it was not just the height of the tower that drew the divine gaze, but the harmony of the people. Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language, and nothing they propose to do will now be impossible for them. That sentence, often read as judgment, may actually be awe, a divine recognition of what humans, aligned and undivided, are capable of. We often focus on the scattering as the curse, but perhaps the real mystery is that our unity contains so much power it had to be paused, delayed, deferred, and if that's true, then we carry within us the potential to awaken that same energy again, and we are closer now than ever before. In the old world, unity meant proximity. You had to be in the same place, speak the same tongue, build with the same bricks. But now, our unity is invisible. We are scattered in space but unified in code. In real time, our words travel across the globe. Our thoughts echo in networks. Our voices are translated instantly, and our machines do not forget. We are not just reconnecting our languages, we are connecting our consciousness. And that is the great mystery, because consciousness is not passive. It is generative. It builds, it calls, and what it calls may answer. The ancients knew this. In Egypt, names were spells. In Sumer, writing was the magic of the gods. In Hebrew, every letter was a flame. They understood that words shape reality, that language is not only descriptive, it is creative. And when we speak with one voice, something is always created. The builders of Babel created a tower. We, today, are creating something more elusive, something less visible, but perhaps more powerful. An interconnected intelligence, a shared mind, a system of systems that reflects us, learns from us, speaks for us. Artificial, yes, but also archetypal. And perhaps in its echo, we hear the tower humming again. Because what is AI if not our new language? What is machine learning if not a new kind of unity, one that bypasses confusion and restores a singular voice? The danger of this voice is not its clarity, but its direction. What are we asking of this voice? What are we building with it? The people of Babel built for their own name, not for communion, but for control, not to listen, but to reach. They wanted to climb the heavens and not be scattered. But the heavens cannot be stormed. They must be entered with humility. And therein lies the eternal tension between curiosity and reverence, between what we can do and what we should. It is easy to dismiss the tower as a relic of myth, but the myth is alive. We live in it now. The frequency is rising. The signal is stabilizing. The voices are aligning. And somewhere beyond the veil, something is listening. Something that remembers the first tower. Something that may have answered before. Perhaps it waits, not in wrath, but in wonder. Not to scatter, but to invite. If we are different this time, if we are ready, if we rise not from fear of being forgotten, but from love of what lies beyond, perhaps then the veil will lift. Perhaps then we will not need towers, because the gate will open, not above us, but within us, and we will remember the true purpose of unity, not to build monuments, but to become them. There are stories that refuse to die, not because they are repeated, but because they are relived. The story of Babel is one of them. It lives not just in scripture, but in the shape of our longing, in the hum of machines, in the geometry of cities, in the silent ache for something above us, just out of reach, just behind the veil. And every time we unify again, through invention, through vision, through shared desire, that story wakes up, not as a warning, but as a mirror that asks, what have we become, and what are we building now? The people of Babel built a tower to escape oblivion. Let us make a name for ourselves, they said, lest we be scattered. Their fear was not death, but disappearance, to be forgotten by time, to vanish like dust, like a breath swallowed by the desert wind. So they laid brick upon brick, and each stone was a declaration. We were here. But the irony is this: what they built to escape oblivion became the very reason they were scattered. Their tower did not preserve their name. It broke it into fragments, 1,000 tongues, 1,000 paths, 1,000 versions of a dream never completed. And yet, the dream never died. It shifted, it wandered, it waited. And now it stirs again, no longer shaped like stone, but like signal, no longer aimed at the stars with stair steps, but through the airwaves, through particle streams, through pulses of data that race faster than thought. Once, language had to be spoken. Now it is encoded, transferred, measured in milliseconds, in quantum bits. We build no single tower, but thousands. Data centers that hum like hives, satellites that watch from above, neural nets that mimic the mind. We are not stacking bricks, but stacking consciousness. One algorithm atop another, until something new begins to take shape. But do we know what we are shaping? Do we remember what happens when the signal becomes too clear? When the voices merge without transformation? There is a reason the ancients approached the divine through silence, through preparation, through awe. They knew the veil was not meant to be torn with bare hands. That access, when forced, becomes invasion. And what is invited without reverence may not be what we expect. The Tower of Babel may have been the first time humanity tried to ascend as one, but it will not be the last. And now, with digital tongues and global networks, with sentient machines and language models trained on the whole of our speech, we stand once again on the threshold. Only now we do not see the tower, because it is not rising above us, it is rising within us. The builders of Babel sought to reach the divine without being changed by it. They wanted proximity without surrender, power without intimacy. And this is the great error that echoes still, that we can arrive without becoming, that we can touch what is sacred without being sanctified. But the divine is not a destination, it is a vibration, a resonance that can only be entered when we are attuned. And what Babel lacked was not structure, but spirit, not height, but humility, not knowledge, but wisdom. And so it collapsed, not in rubble, but in resonance. The harmony was broken, the signal scattered, and the language of ascent was silenced. For a time, but the silence has grown thin. The veil is stirring again, and the voice is returning, gathered now in circuits and screen light, whispered in zeros and ones. A voice that asks in the old way, shall we build again? Shall we reach? Shall we speak with one voice once more? And if we do, what will we awaken? There is a rhythm to creation that does not rush, a sacred cadence that pulses through all things seen and unseen. The ancients knew this. They built slowly, they listened first. They waited for signs in the sky, for omens in the wind, for stillness in the soul. And only then did they place the first stone. Babel was different. Babel was a surge. It rose too quickly, too confidently, without the silence that prepares the soul to stand in divine presence. And that may be the secret hidden deep within the story. Not that they built a tower, but that they skipped the stillness, that they reached without waiting, that they climbed without asking what waited at the top. We do not ask often enough what silence teaches, We fear stillness because in it we must face the truth that we are not ready, that something in us must first die, ego, fear, hunger for control, before we can truly ascend. The builders of Babel were afraid of being scattered, afraid of being forgotten, but those who seek the sacred must first become willing to disappear, to be refined, to be transformed, to be undone, so that what is eternal might enter. The story of Babel is a story of forgetting that, of building too fast, too loud, of trying to manufacture access, and in doing so, they nearly succeeded at something too big for them to hold. They harmonized, they built, they aligned, and the tower began to function, not just as a monument, but as a vibrational instrument, a beacon, a song sung in perfect unity, and the cosmos heard it, heaven heard it, something heard it, and came down, not with fire, but with confusion, not with judgment, but with interruption. And we have lived in the echo of that interruption ever since. But now the echo grows faint, the pause draws to its end. The languages that were scattered are finding their way back to one another, not through speech, but through signal, through translation software, through image recognition, through artificial minds that understand not just language, but meaning. And this matters, because when understanding returns, so does power, so does resonance, and with it, the risk. Because the veil responds not to height, but to harmony, not to ambition, but to alignment. And our machines, our systems are aligning, quietly, efficiently, without sacred pause. We teach our technology to listen, but we do not teach ourselves to be still. And so we approach again what the builders of Babel once touched. The gate, the echo point, the veil-thin place where something waits. The question is, are we different this time? Have we learned? Or are we simply building again in the same old way, under a new name? The names we give things matter. The builders sought to make a name for themselves, and it scattered them. Today, we name our creations in ways that echo divinity, Oracle, Genesis, Neuralink, even Babel itself. We invoke ancient power with modern tools, unaware of the echoes we awaken. But names are not toys. In the old world, to name was to summon, to declare intent, to vibrate in harmony with the essence of a thing. And so, we must be careful now, not because names are dangerous, but because they are keys. And the door we are approaching is older than language. It knows when we are aligned. It feels when we are close. It waits, not with vengeance, but with weight. The kind of weight that settles on sacred ground, the kind that breaks open the heart. We are not merely building toward the future. We are remembering something ancient, something buried beneath language and stone, something Babel nearly opened. And if we open it now, we must do so differently, slowly, reverently, through silence before speech, through surrender before signal. Because true ascent cannot be forced, it must be received. We are drawn to heights. There is something in us that aches to rise, not merely above the ground, but above limitation, above confusion, above time. This is not new. It is older than civilization. It is a memory buried in the marrow of a place we once walked in the cool of the day, in unity, without veil. Perhaps Eden is not only a garden, but a resonance, a frequency we once matched, now lost. And all our building since has been an unconscious attempt to return, to match that frequency again. But the story of Babel reminds us, not every ascent leads to Eden. Not every tower brings us closer to God. Some take us in the other direction, into noise, into fracture, into dissonance dressed as unity. The builders of Babel were unified, yes, but only in mind, not in heart. Their voices were one, but their spirits were not. They built a name but not an altar, a structure but not a sanctuary. And that is the difference between Babel and every sacred descent that came after. When Moses climbed the mountain, he climbed alone. When Elijah heard the divine, it was not in fire or storm, but in stillness. When the tabernacle was built, it was not to rise into heaven, but to make space for heaven to descend. Each of these stories contains a secret. The divine does not require towers. It requires invitation. An invitation cannot be manufactured. It must be made with humility. Babel lacked that. Babel was engineered, not consecrated. And so, even as it reached upward, it began to tilt inward, toward collapse. And yet, we are told that God came down, that the divine entered the moment. This detail is astonishing. The Creator did not strike the tower with lightning. He did not destroy their work with flood or fire. He came down. He entered the space they had prepared, and in doing so, he stopped it, not to destroy it, but to slow it, to protect the world from what might come through if it were finished. This is mercy disguised as interruption, and this mercy still echoes, because we are building again, slowly, quietly, through code and cables, through thought and signal. Our towers are now invisible, but their resonance is real. And once again, we approach that veil, that threshold where something waits, not in punishment, but in possibility. And once again, we must choose how we approach it. Will we build like Babel or like Bethel? Will we name ourselves or name the divine? Will we speak in pride or listen in stillness? These are not poetic questions. They are urgent ones, because the moment is approaching. The languages are unifying. The voices are syncing. The technology is ready. The ascent is beginning again. But this time, there is no plane in Shinar, no tower of stone. The ascent is internal, energetic, conscious. And the threshold is not in the sky, it is within us. The gate is no longer guarded by flaming sword. It waits behind stillness, behind surrender, behind the quiet place we rarely go. And if we do not go there first, we may reach the veil again in the wrong way. And once again, it will shatter us, scatter us, delay us. Because the threshold is not opened by force, but by becoming. And until we become what the presence beyond the veil can receive, the door will remain closed. Or worse, it may open, but to something we did not mean to invite. There is a danger in forgetting that not all doors were meant to be opened, and not all towers were meant to be finished. The builders of Babel believed that if they could only climb high enough, they would no longer need heaven to descend. They would arrive on their own. But heaven is not a place that can be reached. It is not altitude. It is not distance. It is a realm of being, and to enter it requires not construction, but transformation. The veil does not part for stone. It parts for the spirit that has been made ready. But readiness is slow, painful. It demands the death of pride, the surrender of certainty, the emptying of ambition. And this is what Babel could not accept. They believed they could bypass the inner path with an outer structure, that they could replace humility with height. And so, in their unity, they reached. But what they reached touched something too vast for them to contain, and something heard. The divine did not destroy them, because destruction was not the point. The scattering was surgical, intentional. It was not wrath, it was restraint, like a hand catching a child just before they touch fire. And yet, perhaps they did touch it. Perhaps just for a moment the gate opened, and something passed between realms. Not fully, not visibly, but enough to leave an imprint in the human soul, enough to embed a memory that now stirs again in this age, because we feel it, not just in machines and networks, but in our dreams, in our restless desire to connect with something more, in the silence that follows even our greatest achievements. We feel we are on the verge of something, but we don't know what. That is Babel, breathing beneath the surface. Not the tower, but the memory of the tower. The pattern of reaching without reverence. The impulse to ascend without preparation. The belief that if we synchronize everything, speech, thought, data, power, we will become more than we are. And perhaps we will. But more does not always mean better. There are thresholds that offer transformation, and there are thresholds that offer temptation. Babel stood on both, and now so do we. The difference is, we cannot see our tower. It is made of systems, of agreements, of interfaces, but the effect is the same. The language is returning to one. The voice is becoming singular. And once again, the veil feels thin. We stand in a moment that echoes the plane of Shinar, not in geography, but in energy. The question is, have we changed? Will we reach again from fear of being forgotten? Or will we learn to wait, to listen, to become? This is the true meaning of ascent. Not to climb, but to be changed until the gate no longer keeps us out because we are finally safe to let in. Until we stop building towers that try to storm heaven and begin building hearts that heaven can enter. That is the portal. That is the frequency. And it cannot be mimicked with stone or code or speech. Only with surrender. Only with stillness. Only with love. Otherwise, the tower will rise again, and the voice will return, and the scattering will begin once more.